Tonight's lesson is going to be in between Adams. So last week we talked about forgiveness, and next week he said, I think if I remember correctly, he was going to talk about receiving forgiveness, being receptive of that forgiveness. So we're kind of in the middle this week, and we're going to look at love keeps no record of wrongs. There's not really many passages in the New Testament that deal specifically with families. Passages that talk about how husbands are to treat their wives and vice versa, and how parents are supposed to treat their children. There really aren't that many, but the general rule of thumb is that the principles that he does teach us on how we treat our brothers and sisters in Christ will also help us in providing wisdom and insight into our homes. Principles like treat one another, how to treat one another, how to forgive one another, how to be kind to one another, how to love one another. And these can be a powerful impact on our homes. So, go ahead and turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We're really not going to read very much of it. We're not going to focus on much of it. But we're going to be there for a little while. In chapter 13. So what event do we typically hear this chapter read, spoken? A wedding. But the purpose of that chapter was not for weddings, was it? It was for Paul communicating to the church in Corinth. And so it's important when we study that we understand the context and not just think of wedding, right? Paul was writing to a church that was fighting for each other, that was fighting with each other. They were taking each other to court. They were taking the Lord's Supper and leaving their brethren behind. And they were fighting about their spiritual gifts. If you go back a verse to the last verse of chapter 12, he states he will show them a more excellent way. As he has already been talking about the problems they've been dealing with and how they're dealing with each other. Love ought to be the motive for everything we do. So we're going to focus our attention on the second part of this chapter, specifically on verses 4 through 7 and 8, part of 8. This section is about the characteristics of love. So we're going to look at what love looks like. Now we're going to focus even more. We're going to go ahead and read these verses. He gives 15 qualities of love. 15. He gives 7 positives and 8 negatives in these verses. All right, so let's start verse 4. It says, love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. And we're going to stop right there. So now we're really going to narrow our focus, and we're going to look at the very last phrase of verse 5. Verse 5. So what I read in the New King James said, thinks no evil. So what does some of your versions say for that last phrase?
It keeps no record of wrongs.
Okay, it keeps no records of wrongs.
It does not insist on its own way.
It does not insist on its own way.
Does not take into account a wrong suffered.
Does not take into account wrongs.
It does not take into account a wrong suffered.
Wrong suffered, yeah. Yeah, I like that one. Anything else? So, I wrote some of those up here that you mentioned. I also have the American Standard Version, which I always like to go back to since it's a very literal version. Taketh not account of evil. I think we did. It keeps no record of wrongs. It is not irritable or resentful. I don't know if anybody says that. Some English standards do. New American Standard is, I think somebody, yeah, that's the one. That was what you got, isn't it, Dusty? Does not keep an account of a wrong suffered. And then New King James. And they're all kind of different, right? But they're very good at focusing on, helping us focus on what it really is. And the Greek is great too. It literally means it keeps no account of wrongs, like some of these said. But these words here are really important and really help us on our topic tonight. So let's see if I wrote that. I didn't write it down, but so that word I already practiced it. Logizomai. Hopefully I got that right. It's close. Literally means to take account, take inventory, keep a record. And then kakos means evil, crime, or wrong. So taking into account, keeping a record of wrongs, of crimes. Love, we know, does not do this. This is the emphasis but the Bible makes that we should emphasize in our homes. All right, so what this means to my home. We're going to look at three things here on what this means to my home if I do not keep a record. All right, this is if I do not keep a record of the wrongs of those in my family. Number one, love will not be eager to find, to remember, and to recount faults. You know, sometimes, unfortunately, it's fun to catch people, someone doing something that's wrong. Some people feel that way. They enjoy it. But love's not eager to find those offenses. It's very easy to become hypercritical or fault-finding. Matthew 7, first couple verses tell us, "Judge not that you be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you." I need to stop and think about this as a father. And if I'm quick to point out, criticize, find faults with others in my family, I need to focus on these words that we just read, because I love my family, and love doesn't do that. Love does not act that way. Number 2 on this list is love will not be eager. Love does not make mental lists of wrongs and review them frequently. Who hasn't done this? Raise your hand if you haven't done this. Every family fights, fusses. If you don't, there's something wrong with you, and the rest of us need to know what that is. God gave us all our own free will. So with that comes the danger of making the wrong choices, right? We have different thought processes. We have different opinions. And I've got to quit strategizing how I'm going to win the debate, right? How I'm going to win that argument. We all do that, right? We do it amongst... we'll get to that. I don't want to hit that too early. How about have you ever used the words always or never? Right? That's a good indication right there. Whew, I've said it. Sometimes in jest, but still it's hurtful words, and it starts us on a wrong pattern. This can become a bad recurring habit and eventually leads to serious problems down the road. We need to only focus on the one current issue and leave everything out as we deal with it. Hebrews 8:12 says, "For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more." We need this kind of heart in the home. Any comments on those three? I apparently have gotten behind on or I had the wrong verse with that. I did. I must have stuck some extra slides in here and messed myself up.
Nathan, you said something about always and
Go
never,
ahead.
and if you really think about it, nothing is ever always or never. That's
Yeah.
kind of a twister.
Yeah. That's just the way our minds think a lot of times, isn't it? I mean, it's... so this is the note. I'm sorry, I did have us reading the wrong. I was supposed to read that a minute ago. But here, Psalms 32, "Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit." This is when I was talking about the kind of heart that the home should have. So now, do you have any comments? wanting to show you that. There we go. Just to give you a chance to read those again. That last one, love will not constantly reach back into the past in order to strengthen an argument. We've done that a lot too, right? You know, we need to have a short memory. I have a pretty short memory because I don't remember anything. I have a hard time remembering. But when it comes to arguments, for some reason, we seem to hold on to those memories, don't we? Isn't that funny? My wife can tell you that I can walk from our bedroom into my closet. By the time I got there, I've forgotten what I was going in there for. I do it every day. But for some reason, we go back to things from previous arguments or previous experiences we had with our wife. All right. Next. I'm telling you, I had these. I know what I did now. All right. Next list. Risk of keeping a record of wrongs in your home. We endanger ourselves. We must treat those in our household better than they deserve. That's what mercy is, right? James 2:13, for judgment is without mercy to the one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. That's something for us to remember with God too, right? We always have to remember that His mercy is stronger than judgment. I mean, He is merciful to us if we are obedient to Him. And because of that, we will overcome judgment. But it's the same thing in our marriages. We need to be merciful to our spouses, our family members, our brothers and sisters, right? Let me ask, here's a point I thought about as I was studying this. If you can be a New Testament Christian at home, you can be a Christian just about anywhere. Our families see us for who we are. They know our character, our faults, and our habits. They know all about us. So if we can be Christians at home, we can do it anywhere. You know, it's easy for us to go to church and put on a show, and it's easy for us to go out in the world even and put a show. But at home, we have to be careful because we can't keep that show going behind the closed doors at home. We've got to be careful with the kind of mercy we show towards our family. Any comments on this so far? Next one, there is no profit and no good fruit in keeping a list. Now, we're talking about this mental list we're talking about of wrongs, right? Not talking about the list to go to the store like I need, because otherwise I will not get them all. There is no profit and no good fruit in keeping a list. Let's see, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21, which of you, by worrying, can add 1 cubit to his stature? Right? So I took this and I amended it for our discussion tonight. Which of you, by keeping a list, can really help your family to be edified and to grow? Especially for fathers, right? Because, you know, we are supposed to be the spiritual leaders. That's what God has challenged us with. And if we're keeping that list, we're not helping our family. How does your list help someone else to grow closer to God and be more like Jesus? Because all you're doing by keeping that list is you're creating a conflict. You're putting something else in their head. Anytime you talk about it or bring it up, you're putting something into their head that takes them off track, keeps them from focusing on what's important. Third, we are not dealing with offenses properly. We must deal with anger quickly. What's the Bible tell us about that? Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath. So by definition of this verse, if I'm keeping a list, then I'm letting the sun go down my wrath. Right? Now what happens tomorrow, I put something else on my list. Now I've got 2 things as I let the sun go down the next day. And that list builds and builds and builds over time. And eventually what's going to happen? What's going to happen to our relationships? You all know what's going to happen. It's going to fall apart. That tension is just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. I know at work we did a illustration one time, our group, and we were in a design meeting, and if anybody's been in something like that where you're trying to come up with good ideas and stuff, there's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be, I have a different opinion than that person, right? Listening to people obviously is very important, but you know how you get when you're fighting for your idea, you create tension. And so we have this big, it's almost like a rubber band, that those who are in conflict pull it and keep pulling it and keep pulling it, and you feel that tension, right? So it's kind of an exercise to kind of, reset. The Bible instructs us in Matthew 18 how to proceed handling an offense. We are not dealing with offenses properly. So we'll talk about that, I think, in a minute, a little more. Fourth one is, it keeps me from having a forgiving heart. If I'm keeping a record of wrongs, it keeps me from having a forgiving heart. I'm not practicing forgiveness. You can't have a list and a forgiving heart at the same time. Number 5, it imperils our ability to have a healthy relationship. Some of you might have been in my class last quarter, and one of the characters we studied was Joseph. If you go to Genesis chapter 37, I don't think, or did I put this on the board? I might have. No, I didn't. Oh, yeah, I did. Here it is. Sorry. I did put it up here. In verse 4 and 8, I'm kind of skipping some verses here, but this is at the beginning of, we learn about Joseph. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. And his brothers, in verse 8, and his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. From these two verses alone, we can come up with the list of records, and we can also recall some of the other events that took place in this story of the list that his brothers are keeping. One is how great he was going to be. This idea that they were going to be bowing down to him, right? How they were going to, how they were going to bow down to him. He's our Father's favorite, right? He got the coat of many colors. He has a different mother than we do. He and Benjamin had a mother, and then the rest of them, between Isaac's two wives and their maidservants, Benjamin was his only true brother with the same mother. So they hated him for that reason. Our father, because his mother was Isaac's first love that we studied about. Our father loves Joseph's mother more than ours. Joseph has a beautiful coat of colors, like I mentioned. They couldn't speak a civil word to him. It says they could not speak peaceably to him. And their anger just grew and grew and grew because their list grew. It's a good thing we don't ever treat our families that way, right? Again, if we're not forgiving and forgetting, we're continually adding to that list. Let's see. So we can't have good relationships if we're keeping a record. All right. The next one, I got a couple more of these, I think. 2 more. It appeals to our pride. In Luke 18, verse 11, the Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. Again, here we see a list the Pharisee had, right? He made a list of all the wrongs they had so that he could do what? What was his purpose in being like this? What was he trying to get? Or what was he trying to accomplish?
Look at me, how awesome I am.
He's trying to make himself feel better. I mean, that's all he's really accomplishing there, right? He's trying to make himself feel better. What a deception if we believe this. You know, if we're saying to our spouse or others, you've got things in your life to fix, I don't. I mean, that's our message to them. If we're keeping that list, you got things to fix, I don't. I'm good.
Reminds me of to get the log out of your eye before you worry about the speck in somebody else's.
Yep. We have several good examples of that in the Bible, like that. And Joseph is a great example of that. And we learned some great lessons when we studied that last quarter.
I wasn't in that class, but I can say that, I mean, I don't know what you talked about in that class, but I'm looking at Joseph's brothers thinking, you know, I had 3 older sisters, and they didn't like me either. I didn't have a coat of many colors, but but they were very jealous. Just, I don't know why, but they were just mean. And so, you know, the brothers too, I could see, you know, as I got older, I saw a little bit. I was the baby, and, you know, I was the only kid in the house when that happened. So it was different than all of us in the house at the same time. So I could kind of see where the brothers might get, you know, if you're treating one kid better and they're the best and the other kid's getting the leftovers and the scraps and stuff, that could probably get a little old, and it can make somebody be angry.
And that was one of the lessons we learned about in that was about Isaac. But what was interesting is when we went and studied Joseph. I hope I didn't say Joseph a minute ago. Sorry, not Joseph. Jacob. I did that last quarter. It was the same thing. The fathers were repeating that same thing. They had a favorite.
Which can cause that problem.
Right. So that's, and we're not on parenting tonight technically, but yes, that's a great point that in parenting the same thing, don't have favorites because you will cause problems like that. And those kids will keep a list of things of their siblings, right? And those siblings will grow apart.
They have really good memories. They remember a lot of stuff.
Anything else? I'm still trying to get used to these glasses. All right. Last one on this list, risk of keeping records of wrong in your home. It keeps us from joy. Think of the parable of the prodigal son. I think we talked about that a couple weeks in Ben or somebody. In Luke 15, you know, that story, it's really probably more about his brother. When we see the forgiveness, he did wrong, he repented, he came back, his father instantly forgave him. But at the end of the story, it's focused on his brother, right? The brother is making a list in his head. Looking at the verses here, but he was angry and would not go in, therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years I have been serving you, I never transgressed your commandment any time. And yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. So here we see that list he's keeping in his head. I mean, we know that earlier when his brother left and he took his, inheritance, he had already started making that list. That when his brother came home, and notice he said, that son of yours, right? He didn't refer to him as his brother. That home should have been filled with joy. But unfortunately, that other son didn't want any part of it. Instead, it's a place of bitterness, resentment, because the brother kept a list of his brother's wrongs. He's fractured the relationships in the home between not just his brother, but his father, who of course represents God in that story. But we know a father who eagerly, quickly, and freely forgives, just like that father did there. All right, so that was the 7. I don't have that list back to here. 7 items. This is if you do keep record of wrongs in your home. So we endanger ourselves. There's no profit and no good fruit in keeping a list. We're not dealing with offenses properly. It keeps me from having a forgiving heart. It imperils our ability to have a healthy relationship, and it appeals to our pride and keeps us from real joy. Now we're running out of time, and we're going to get to... Now we're going to get kind of some more application. Turn to Ephesians chapter 4. We'll see if we can get through this. I'm assuming they're going to ring the bell, or it will be dismissed at 8, I'm assuming. Ephesians chapter 4. All right. Hey, Dusty, would you read 31 for us, please?
Ephesians 4:31.
Yeah.
Let all bitterness and anger and wrath and shouting and slander be put away from you, along with all malice.
All right. So signs you might be keeping a record of wrongs in your life. So that's what we're going to look at, a list of these things. So bitterness, this is when you go back to revisit the scene of the crime, right? This is when you remember what happened, the argument. You're going to replay it over and over in your head, right? And you're reflecting on the pain, right? And that can trigger your emotions and your adrenaline. And what happens when your emotions and adrenaline rise?
Your anger gets bigger and probably your blood pressure too.
I said you say things you don't really mean.
Yeah, I mean, you get to that point where you're talking without thinking. And you're saying things that you're saying things that you mean because you're bitter. You're not going the right, you're not thinking about it right. You're not handling it correctly. And that's what bitterness is. Second one is wrath. Wrath is a sudden burst of anger like a lightning bolt. It can be triggered by stress and others, often directed towards loved ones. I thought about, when you've heard that, right? When your mother tells you, hey, wait till your dad gets home, right? It's not a good practice because what's going to happen when your dad gets home? Assuming it's work week, right? It's a good chance, they could be stressed, or the wife, if the wife works too. It's either way, but we got to be careful when we come home from work. We always learn, hey, keep that at work. Don't bring it home. But still, our stress could be high, right? Our temper could be very short, so we have to be careful with that. Potential danger. And you might end up taking it out on your family even though they had nothing to do with that stress. And that's what wrath is. It's like a lightning bolt. Third is anger. Anger is a little different. Anger is like a constant boiling under the surface, right? It can be seen in a person's demeanor, their body language, their voice, the tone of their voice. And often when you see those signs, it's accompanied by a list of grievances. Have you ever seen anybody wake up angry? That happens from time to time, right? That's just one of those things you're probably better off just staying out of the way and getting stuff done you need to yourself. The next one's clamor. Now, anybody remember the Jerry Springer Show? None of us probably watched it, but we know what it was. It was known for family conflicts, and they always, told the people to, hey, get out there and yell and be loud, right? And don't worry about listening. Just yell and say whatever comes up top of your head. Just go at it, right? It involves that's getting in somebody's face, ignoring what they're saying, ignoring reason in your head, and just saying whatever comes to your mouth. These interactions can be recorded in one's mind, right? If you come home and you start arguing with your spouse, you're keeping everything that's in your head, but you're not listening. So you're just adding to that list of yours. Next is evil speaking. Speaking to others about someone who wronged you. When you do that, what are you seeking? Agreement?
Like, pity.
Yeah.
Pity.
Yeah. Pity, sympathy. Yeah.
I was thinking about that when you were talking about anger and clamor, and I was thinking, in my business I hear and see a lot of things, and when you repeat whatever somebody did to you, the more you speak about it and continue to speak about it, the longer it lingers around. You address it, forgive it, and move on. And that's hard to do. It's easy. I think I'm finding it easier as I get older to do. But it's hard to do when it hurts deep. When it's a deep hurt, it's harder to do. But most of the time, it's just most of the time it's just a misunderstanding or somebody, just.
Well, a lot of
doesn't like when
times,
you do something.
a lot of times when we go to someone else and share with them what's happening, we'll share things with them whether it's true or not. And the more we share that information, the more in our mind it becomes true, and it stays in our mind. It stays in our list. So, evil speaking, going to someone else. That's why the Bible teaches us to what? When someone offends, go to them first, right? That's what it teaches us. Go to them first. All right, last one on this list is malice. Anybody know what malice is? So it's like if somebody walks into this room and my blood pressure rises, right? I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to make eye contact with them. There's just a hostility between us. Hoping I don't have, I'm not sure I can restrain myself, right? If it's that bad, I don't know if we have to talk and look at each other, it may just blow up. That's what malice is. So that's very destructive. All right, so still haven't heard the bell, so we might make this. So verse 31 tells us to put all those things away. That was one thing I hadn't brought up yet, right? It mentions these things, but it also says to put these away. Put them away from you. So the first step, what's the first step when your child's doing something wrong, right? What's the first thing you say to them? Stop, right? And then for a good parent, kind of what do we do next? What we kind of do? Well,
Explain to them why they need to stop.
yeah. And then a great exercise to do after that is to direct them on to something positive, something good. So stop, tell them why, and redirect them, right? And that's what God does with us. So when He says stay away from these things, that's what He's telling us. He's saying stop, get rid of those. Now here's what you're going to do. So we're going to look at verse 32. Read verse 30. I'm sorry, is that right? Yeah, 32. Dusty, if you got that.
Instead, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, graciously forgiving each other, just as God in Christ also has graciously forgiven you.
All right. So we're just going to talk these pretty quick. So first one we heard there is basically pursue kindness. Pretty obvious. The next one is be tender-hearted. How to treat others, how to treat our family, how to treat our brothers and sisters. That's what the Bible teaches us a lot, right? Is how to treat our brothers and sisters. Paul writes a lot about that, right? That's what I was saying. If you look at the verses that talk specifically about your spouse and your family, there's really not a lot of verses in the Bible. It's because it's the same principles. But be tender-hearted. Seek to understand before being understood. As husbands, and anytime we have web seminars or anything on being married, always comes up about husbands need to learn that your wife just wants you to listen to her, right? When she doesn't want you to fix her problem, she needs you to just listen. And what we don't understand is the reason they tell us to do that is because by listening, that helps us to better understand them. Helps us to understand if something like this happens again and it ruffles their feathers or they get upset or whatever, we will understand their thought process and we'll understand how to just kind of, whether we just need to back off or just listen, right? Just how to help them best. It may be, doing something special for them, whatever. That's why they tell the men to listen, because We need to understand the women better. Same thing though, women, we have a hard time, especially early in our marriage. We don't understand each other that well, right? We're learning. So it's always important for both of us to listen because that helps us understand. But it never fails. I mean, that's a hard lesson men have to learn because we're so, we're always fixing it. Even though I can't fix a lot, she'll tell you that. We still want to fix things, right? All right, next one is forgive. How do I forgive my family? I am to forgive them as God in Christ forgave me. When God forgives, He doesn't dredge up old sins over and over again. He doesn't delay in forgiving. He forgives quickly, eagerly, and freely. Let's see. Even though we've reconciled, I've forgiven, I've made up, I've sought what's best for my wife or my spouse, the devil doesn't stop working on us, right? So a few weeks from now, those same memories of that offense that my wife did, it's going to come up again, and I've got to focus. I'm going to be tempted to go back to that list and keep adding to it. I've got to stop doing that. Therefore, I must deliberately remember kindness, tenderheartedness, and forgiveness. So, I haven't heard a bell yet, but I'm pretty sure we're going to be leaving any minute. So I've got 2 slides left, so I did pretty good on this, I think. The conclusion, love keeps no records of wrongs. This is not a one-time occurrence, but a daily battle. I forgave them, and I'm not going to keep that list anymore. That's what we've got to do. When we become Christians, Jesus changes the reason why we do everything we do. Right? Everything in our life, Jesus changes. If we follow Jesus, it's going to change the reasons why we do everything we do. We're created in Christ for good works, as Ephesians 2:10 tells us. So that's why it's important, and thing you always hear in any family marriage seminars, let God be the center and focus of our marriage, our family, and all that we do, allowing His Word to guide us in becoming who we want to be. So, I don't know.